The history of sizeism. Am I recording? Shit. There we go. So, it used to be okay to make fun of fat people. And then people kind of saw that, fat is really close to a person. So when you make fun of fat, you're basically making fun of a person, and it's not nice to make fun of people. So it kind of started to not be okay to make fun of fat people. But then something happened, something pretty recent, at least historically speaking, is that there's this thing called fat liberation that came around. And it seems to me that even though it's not okay to make fun of fat people, it's pretty much open season to make fun of fat liberation people. So I say that all to preface this video, which is not to make fun of fat people, but to gently mock the fat liberationists. Specifically, whoever it is that posted this on the corkboard at the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington, that reads, "The history of sizeism in the U.S. is a history of social control. It's a history that's inextricably intertwined with the oppression of other bodies labeled unruly, unworthy, trans, black, disabled, indigenous, female, poor, and more. Fat resistance done right," which sounds like a cooking direction. How would you like your fat? Done right. Fat resistance done right is resistance to the complex webs of oppression that are white supremacy, of course, capitalism, of course, and hetero-patriarchy, of course. What does any of that have to do with fat? What does trans rights, racial rights, disabled rights, indigenous rights, female rights, poor rights, and more rights, what does that have to do with fat rights? Furthermore, what does fat have to do with the complex webs of oppression that are white supremacy, capitalism, and hetero-patriarchy? Well, I'll tell you the most important connection between fat liberation and all those other liberations is that fat liberation needs to attach itself, just like fat does, to the body of other progressive movements, because the fat movement on its own wouldn't make any sense. The fat movement requires a huge enemy, an enemy much larger than the buttocks of all the fat people put together. And that enemy, the biggest enemy that they could find, is the most supreme enemy, which is white supremacy enemy, capitalism enemy, and hetero-patriarchy enemy. Now, before I go on, I want to try to make sense of like this idea that I had when I was practicing this episode. So what you have is you have somebody who is disabled in some way, right? And then you have somebody who is kind of calloused and mean. And this mean person has a friend, and the disabled person has a friend, right? So there's the compassionate person, there's the disabled person, there's the mean person, and then there's the mean person's buddy over there, right there, right? And so the mean person looks at the disabled person, and then he starts to say that his friend is just like that disabled person. Like, oh yeah, look at you half stick, right? And now technically, this disabled person is not a half stick. He's a bent stick, but the epithet comes into being like of a half stick because the bent stick is only half as tall as the rest of the sticks, right? And, the guy's like, oh, don't call me a half stick. I'm not a half stick. You freaking half stick, you freaking half stick. And eventually it just kind of becomes a part of the vernacular and they laugh, you freaking half stick. They're walking down a road and a power line lands on a car. Oh, that's a bad example. No, they're walking down a road and a squirrel like runs out on the road and gets squished and they're like, ha ha, you half stick, to the squirrel. And they're like, ha 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 ha. So they're mean, right? Now, here's the person over here who cares about not the half stick, but the bent stick, right? And she's like, don't call people a half stick. That's mean. You're displaying your full stick privilege, and that's mean. And the person who is not a half stick, see, it's really catchy. It's hard not to say they're a half stick. But the bent stick person's like, yeah, it hurts my feelings. I'm just trying to live my life. And they're like, yeah. We have to protect people who are half sticks, right? The compassionate person is. And they're like, no, we're not going to do that. But the compassionate person convinces the mean person's friend that, half stick's kind of a bad word, and everybody starts getting kind of cringy when you make the half stick jokes, right? And one of the ways that she does is like, we're not going to call this a half stick. This is a bent stick. Well, then the mean guy just starts using the word bent stick all the time, right? Like, oh, look at the bent stick. Look at the bent stick squirrel, right? Or like there's a caribou walking down the road and it falls into a ditch and they're like, ha, you freaking bent stick. And, this person is constantly trying to exert control on behalf of Mr. Bent stick over here, right? And this is the whole thing with progressive values, is that there's that euphemistic treadmill of like whether or not you can call this person a half stick or a bent stick or even just a tweaked stick. Maybe that was like, oh, it's just like a tweaked stick. And they're like, you freaking tweaker, like, so no matter what we call the bent stick person, the mean person's always going to use that as a negative attribution applied to other things in a mocking, mean tone, in a mocking, mean way. Now, the thing is with the social justice stuff is that they, instead of talking about the problem and just coming to the terms with the fact that this problem is actually a problem, it's a deficit of some sort that needs to be shouldered by this individual, right? And we can separate the individual from the brokenness of their, merely physical container, right? But at the same time, that brokenness is always going to be a disadvantage. But in trying to get more and more away from the fact that it's a negative attribute to be a bent stick person, this caring person, maybe this caring person convinces Bendy Stick to go along with her, but she goes on a crusade. The caring person goes on a crusade to, instead of recognize the problem as a problem, to say that all the problem doesn't come from the stick, but from society. And that's basically what's happening with the fat liberation. Instead of coming to terms with the fact that fat is oppressive, like literally oppressive, like it ties you to gravity and other like physical systems that control your blood pressure and it hurts your organs and stuff like that. Instead of coming to terms with the unhealthiness of the lifestyle, they project the negativity as belonging somehow to the patriarchy. Which goes to say, what is the patriarchy? What is white supremacy? What is hetero-patriarchy? What is capitalism? In the end, it means the model of health, or the model of that which works, the model of that which is efficient. That's why they constantly align these things to systems that are actually giving all these resources that can actually aid the bendy stick person in some areas, but actually make them even more bendier in other cases. To read the rest of the poster. Fat is radical. A call for submissions. By and for fat folks. A zine. Celebrating fat is love. It's defiance. And it's power. Now, this is basically progressive intersectionality in a nutshell here. They hate all the power that actually works, and they call that stuff oppressive, but then they claim a bunch of power. And the power is emotional power. The power is basically feelings. It's emotive power. It's not actually like working in the world kind of power. It's artistic power. It's expressive power. It's power that you can share with your friends and get together, and then you can like channel your powers into one great momentous power hour, right, on the steps of some building or on the shelf of some zine symposium. So they disparage power while at the same time simultaneously trying to, basically have a power grab and use a mixture of positive and negative terms, such as love, defiance, right? Love, defiance, love, defiance. Any way that you interpret the theme is perfect. So there's no better or worse. There's no right or wrong. Anything is perfect. As long as you're on this project, it's already perfect, right? You don't have to work on it. You don't have to make it better. You don't have to aim for beauty, aim for the difficult things that elicit something that perpetuates beyond just those powerful emotions. No, it's already perfect. Visual art and there's an asterisk that doesn't lead anywhere, at least not that I can find on this page. Visual art, asterisk. Poetry and writing, of course. Lists. Lists are perfect. Academic pieces. Love letters to your fat idols. Charts, tips, anything from your personal experience. All these things are great. Queer and trans folks, people of color, bigger-bodied fat people, not just fat people anymore, but bigger-bodied fat people, and folks with disabilities to the front. Now, in a way, I'm sorry to say this, I don't want to, be a meanie, right? I don't want to be a part of this crew. Yeah, well, I guess I am kind of a part of this crew, but I do want to respect the bendy straw, but I'm actually arguing against the caretaker, right? And this is the other thing about progressivism, which makes it so virulent in a viral sort of way, right? Is because if you start to criticize the person that's standing on behalf of bendy straw, they can claim that you're being just as mean as if you're mocking the bendy straw person. You cannot criticize those who are acting on behalf of the bendy straw without disparaging directly or indirectly the bendy straw. So they use the power that they've created out of inverting the taboo of, a basically reality negative trait into a socially acceptable trait. And then that stigma is now like kind of twisted around so that you cannot either mock that or mock the bendy straw. But I'm going to say that no, now we don't even have to mock the fat people anymore because you have the people who fight for fat people. We can make fun of them. So progressivism, the stronger it goes, the more of a riptide it avails of itself. So we no longer need to be mean to the bendy straw. We can make fun of the person who thinks that the bendy straw's bendy strawedness is derived from the non-bendiness of everybody else, right? Because there would be no bendy straw without the straight straws, which is the twist that I think Judith Butler made with the whole queering theory. The straightness is defined in relation to bendiness, right? Fitness is defined in relationship to that which is unfit, which does make sense on the surface, but actually in a Darwinian sense, that which is unfit will be eradicated due to its own unfitness. And that which is straight about these will only persist insofar as the world requires straightness from the straws. So there's something very harsh about reality that I think all these systems of oppression are actually protecting us from. But within those systems, you can start to make little critical maneuvers about what would be obviously unfit for a world that doesn't have the white supremacist capitalist hetero-patriarchy protecting everybody and making them fat. To finish up, so underneath all these words is this kind of doughy, porous, molded, kind of big-bodied fat idol. And in the middle of that is what appears to be an eye, but I think it's just a belly button with a dark tongue extruding from it. And then towards the bottom, there's either little squiggly worms going up, or maybe hairy roll bars going up, or sweat-drenched rivulets pouring down. But among those stretchy, rivulet, hairy pockets on the lower body of the big-bodied fat idol are the words daily lived resistances, queer theory, fat liberation roots, intersectional feminism, black intersectional feminism, and Caleb Luna, which might be a great thinker or the person who drew this thing. Submissions are due March 8th, so that means that you guys have only so much time before you can submit your theories to here. Queer and trans folk, people of color, big body, fat people, and folks with disabilities to the front. There you go. That's a short one. Good night. Have a good weekend. Bye.